My son and daughter-in-law have never truly seen me as part of their family. To them, I'm nothing more than a walking ATM. They spend my money freely, yet treat me cruelly, comparing me to my daughter-in-law's mother every single day. They kicked me out of family dinners without a hint of shame, yet still used my credit card to pay their enormous bills. My love may be limitless, but my patience and my savings are not. So I decided it was time to teach those ungrateful children a life lesson they would never forget. I invite you to listen to my story. Stay with me until the very end of this video to see what awaits them. And don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment to say hi. I'd love to know where my dear viewers are watching from. All my life, I was known as Dr. Karen Wilson, the internist who never left a patient waiting. I lived in Cleveland, where winters were long and hospital corridors even longer. My days began before sunrise and ended after 10 at night. The hospital lights became my sun and moon. Colleagues admired my stamina. They said I had iron nerves and a golden heart. But the truth is, I simply didn't know how to stop. Work filled the silence I was too afraid to face at home. My husband passed away 20 years ago, his heart too tired from waiting for me to slow down. I was in the ICU when they called to tell me he was gone. Even now, that moment haunts me. The sterile smell of disinfectant, the sound of a monitor beeping somewhere, and the sudden realization that I had saved thousands of lives except the one that mattered most. Andy, my son, was only 15 back then. I remember the way he stopped looking for me in the audience during his school concerts. By the time he left for college, we had become polite strangers sharing a last name. I sent him money, advice, and care packages, but never time or presence. That was my greatest sin. When I retired at 70, I thought maybe life would give me another chance to fix things. I cleaned out my office, carried home boxes of awards, photos, and thank you letters from patients. I placed them in the study, but they looked meaningless beside the empty dining table. The silence of my house felt heavier than any hospital night shift. Every morning I made coffee and sat by the wooden shelf where my husband's picture still smiled at me. His eyes seemed to ask, "What are you chasing now, Karen?" Sometimes I whispered back, "If I had stayed home more, maybe our son would have grown into a different man." But regrets don't heal like wounds. They just linger quietly, like old scars under the skin. Andy's house was only 3 blocks away, yet every time I walked there, it felt like crossing a continent. I often carried a basket of homemade soup or apple pie, the way I used to when he was a boy. Sometimes I picked up my granddaughter from school, trimmed the hedges in his backyard, or folded laundry left on the couch. I told myself I was just helping, just being a mother, but deep down I was trying to rebuild something I had let crumble years ago. Andy would open the door with that polite stiffness that made me feel like a visitor. He'd glance at the basket in my hands and say things like, "Mom, you're retired now. You don't have to do this. We can manage on our own." His tone wasn't cruel, but it was colder than winter air. It wasn't the words that hurt, it was how easily he said them, like I didn't belong anymore. I would smile and reply, "I just wanted to check on the kids, that's all." My voice always came out softer than I meant it to, fragile like an old photograph fading at the edges. He would nod, already turning away, his mind somewhere else. Emails, clients, deadlines. The door would close, and I'd be left staring at the white paint, feeling the echo of a life that used to include me. Sometimes I lingered on the porch, pretending to fix my scarf while listening to my grandchildren's laughter from inside. I told myself that their laughter was enough, that love didn't need to be returned to exist. But as I walked home, carrying my empty basket, the streetlights seemed to whisper otherwise. At home, I placed the basket on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. The silence met me again, familiar and suffocating. I looked at the photos on the wall, Andy as a boy, grinning with missing front teeth, and wondered when the warmth in his eyes had vanished. Maybe I had buried it under too many years of absence, too many nights of not being there when he needed a mother, not a doctor. Anna came into Andy's life like honey poured over bitter coffee, sweet on the surface, but it changed the taste of everything. She worked as an office administrator, always smiling, always knowing the right things to say. In public, she called me Mom with a voice soft as silk, offering me tea and asking about my health. But behind closed doors, her sweetness curdled into something sharp. I could feel it every time I visited, in the way she rearranged the dishes I had washed or sighed when I stayed too long. She was clever, I'll give her that. She didn't push Andy to turn against me outright. Instead, she planted small seeds, just enough to grow doubt in his mind. I overheard her once, late in the kitchen, whispering to him, "Your mother means well, but she just can't let go of control. She's lonely, Andy. That's why she keeps showing up. She doesn't want us to live our own lives." The next day, Andy repeated her words almost verbatim. "Mom, you need to find your own hobbies. You can't keep depending on us for company." His tone was firm, rehearsed. I looked at him, wondering when my son started quoting his wife like scripture. From that point, something inside me cracked. The boy who once ran to me for comfort now looked at me as if I were an obligation. I saw it in his eyes, the silent fatigue, the polite tolerance. Anna had turned me into a burden, an emotional weight he didn't want to carry. Worse still, she began weaving stories among the neighbors. One afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell from next door stopped me while I was taking out the trash. "Karen, dear, I heard you're staying at Andy's place these days. Must be hard adjusting after retirement." Her tone was kind, but her eyes were filled with pity. I didn't understand until later when someone mentioned Anna had told them I was broke and living off my son's family. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the phone silent, the house still. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that truth always finds its way out. But lies are faster, and Anna knew exactly how to make them sound like sympathy. I kept showing up, no matter how heavy my heart felt. I brought gifts for the children, little things like coloring books and chocolate muffins. I fixed the leaking faucet in the kitchen, replaced a broken light bulb, wiped the counter when no one was looking. Those small gestures gave me comfort, a fragile illusion that I still mattered. When I carried groceries to their doorstep or baked bread for Sunday mornings, it wasn't about help. It was about belonging. Anna never said anything cruel outright, but her eyes did. Every time I caught that flicker of irritation, that quiet disgust as she watched me tidy her kitchen, I lowered my gaze and pretended not to notice. I told myself not to cause trouble, not to give Andy a reason to choose between us. I swallowed my pride again and again, convincing myself it was for peace, though the peace always came at my expense. One afternoon, I overheard them talking. Anna's voice was sharp beneath her polite tone. "She means well, but she's always here, Andy. I can't breathe in my own house." There was a pause, and then Andy's sigh, long, weary, and final. "Mom just doesn't know when to stop. She makes you feel pressured, I get it." Those words cut deeper than anything Anna could ever say. It wasn't just that he didn't defend me, it was that he agreed. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, holding a bag of bread still warm from the oven. For a moment I wanted to walk in and shout, to remind him of the nights I worked double shifts just to pay his tuition, the winters I spent alone so he could have everything. But the anger dissolved before it could rise. I quietly set the bread on the counter and left before anyone noticed. Back home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. The house seemed to echo with silence, the kind that hums inside your chest. I realized then that the worst kind of pain isn't being insulted, it's being invisible. Andy's silence told me more than words ever could. I was no longer a mother in his world, just a shadow passing through his doorway. The trouble began quietly, like a storm you don't see coming until the windows rattle. Andy called one evening, his voice tight but trying to sound calm. He'd been laid off in a company downsizing. "It's temporary, Mom," he said, though I could hear the fear he was trying to hide. A week later, Anna came by, her eyes red and swollen. She spoke fast, words tumbling out between sobs. "The rent, the kids' tuition, groceries, everything's piling up. I don't know how we're going to make it." I didn't think twice. Maternal instinct is faster than logic. I went to my drawer, pulled out my retirement credit card, and placed it in her trembling hands. "Just use it for now. I said softly. Pay what you need. When things get better, you can return it. She hugged me, crying harder, whispering thank yous that sounded so sincere I almost cried too. For a moment, I felt useful again, needed. Maybe this was my chance to mend what was broken between us. But peace built on pity never lasts. A few weeks later, I opened my bank statement and froze. The charges blurred before my eyes. $450 at a spa, $1,200 at an upscale steakhouse, $3,000 at Gucci, bottles of red wine from luxury stores I'd never even heard of. My hands shook as I scrolled through line after line of indulgence. The next day, Anna called again, her voice quivering. Mom, things are still tight. Andy's unemployment check barely covers the bills. I'm so worried. Her tone was practiced, soft, full of helpless sweetness. I listened in silence, my eyes still on the printed statement on my kitchen table. She wasn't worried about survival. She was worried about losing her comfort. I finally understood. They didn't need money. They needed someone to fund their excuses. That night I sat in the quiet glow of my lamp, staring at the photo of Andy on my mantel. My son, once so proud, now blind to what his life had become. I whispered to the picture, "You may have lost your job, but she's the one who's truly bankrupt." One morning, as sunlight spilled across my kitchen counter, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. I wiped my hands on a towel and checked the message. $1,200 charged at the Golden Spa. My heart gave a small jolt. I blinked, hoping I'd read it wrong. The Golden Spa wasn't a grocery store. It wasn't tuition. It was luxury, pure indulgence. That afternoon, I asked Anna gently, trying to sound casual. Sweetheart, I just got a message from the bank. Did you happen to use the card at a place called the Golden Spa? She looked up from her phone, face smooth as glass. Oh, that must be a system error. I just bought some body wash online. Maybe it went through under a different name. She smiled, so convincing it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. But something in her tone didn't sit right, the kind of sweetness that's too polished, too deliberate. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. For the first time, I printed my card statements, pages of them. The sound of the printer hummed through the quiet house. When I laid the papers out, a pattern emerged. $30 for coffee, $50 for lunch at a restaurant I'd never heard of, $180 at a boutique children's store. The list went on, small, tidy amounts that blended into the rhythm of everyday life. But together, they told a different story. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the faint heat of anger beneath my skin. But then I took a breath and forced myself to be calm. Maybe she just needed to feel normal again, I told myself. Maybe all these little things were her way of coping with the stress, the embarrassment of Andy losing his job. Still, that night when I closed my laptop, I couldn't shake the unease settling in my chest. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust. How easily it slips away when someone smiles too sweetly and lies too well. It happened over lunch one quiet Saturday. The children were laughing in the living room. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. And for a brief moment, everything almost felt normal. I waited until Anna sat down across from me, her phone glowing beside her plate. I took a slow sip of water and said softly, "Anna, dear, I want to remind you of something. Please be a little careful with the spending. This is my retirement money. I'm not upset, but it would be wise to use it thoughtfully." She didn't even look up right away. Her fingers kept dancing across her phone screen, a faint smile fixed on her lips. "Of course, Mom," she said lightly. "It's just a few nice meals for the kids. You know how fast they grow." Her tone was airy, sweet, perfectly polite, yet completely hollow. I nodded, pretending to be reassured. There was no anger in her voice, no defensiveness, just that effortless charm that wrapped her lies like candy around poison. She smiled again, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, and went back to scrolling through her messages as if our conversation had been no more important than the weather. I chewed my food slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. The way she said "for the kids" made me sound heartless if I questioned it further. How could I argue with a mother feeding her children? That was the genius of her manipulation. It left me with no room to stand without seeming cruel. After lunch, I helped clear the table in silence while Anna hummed softly, tapping her phone, probably planning her next outing. Andy was still at work, unaware of the quiet tension between his wife and me. That evening, I sat by the window, the late sunlight washing over the curtains, and told myself I had done the right thing. Gentle words, not confrontation. But deep down, a whisper of doubt stirred. I didn't know then that within days, the spending would double: restaurant bills, luxury stores, beauty treatments, as if my soft warning had only encouraged her. It wasn't carelessness anymore, it was a silent challenge. A week later, the truth arrived in an envelope, thick, heavy, and far too long to be innocent. I tore it open at my kitchen table, expecting maybe a few more small expenses: coffee, groceries, something forgivable. But as the pages unfolded, my breath shortened. 10 sheets of transactions, each one colder than the last. Gucci handbags, French wine, VIP concert tickets, and then a line that froze me completely. The Grand Regent Hotel Chicago, 5-star. My card. I flipped to the next page and saw it. Lux Wellness Retreat, $4,800. My hands trembled. Lux, the same resort Anna once mentioned over dinner, laughing dreamily about someday going there, when we finally have extra money. I remembered nodding politely then, thinking it was just talk. But now, here it was, my retirement account funding her dream. I sat still for a long time, the pages spread before me like a crime scene. This wasn't help anymore. This was theft dressed in perfume and polite smiles. Every purchase whispered betrayal in neat printed lines. She had taken not just my money, but my trust, the last fragile thread that tied us together. Slowly, I gathered the papers, aligned the corners, and clipped them together with a metal pin. The sound of that small click felt final, like closing a chapter. I slid the file into a brown folder, labeled it quietly in my mind: proof. Not for revenge, not yet, but for the day truth would need a voice. When I placed the folder in my desk drawer, I paused, staring at it. My reflection shimmered faintly on the polished wood. I thought of Andy, of his faith in his wife, of his blindness. I didn't want to believe he knew, but a darker thought whispered, maybe he didn't want to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. The numbers replayed in my head like a broken record: 4,800, 5-star hotel, Gucci, wine. Betrayal rarely comes with noise. It hides in receipts, in smiles, in people you love too much to suspect. And so I waited, quiet but no longer blind, my evidence sealed, and my heart turning colder with every passing hour. That evening, I went to Andy's house with the folder pressed tightly against my chest. The air outside was cool, the kind that hinted at early autumn, but my palms were damp. When he opened the door, I forced a small smile. "Andy, can we talk for a minute?" He nodded, distracted, his phone still in his hand. Inside, the television was on, and Anna's perfume lingered in the air. I sat down at the kitchen table and slid the printed statements toward him. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," I began quietly. "I just want to understand. These charges, Gucci, the Golden Spa, the hotel in Chicago, what are they?" For a moment, he didn't say anything. His eyes darted over the papers, then away. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and let out a short, impatient sigh. "Mom, are you seriously doing this, checking up on us?" "I'm just asking for clarity," I replied. "You know this is my retirement card. I only wanted to help when you were struggling." He laughed under his breath, a sound that didn't belong to my son. "You're making it sound like we stole from you. We're fine. Maybe you should stop trying to control everything." The word control hit harder than any shout could have. His tone was flat, cold, the kind you use with strangers you no longer care to please. For a second, I thought I saw Anna's reflection in his expression, her calm arrogance, her polished indifference. I swallowed hard. "Andy, I'm not trying to control you. I just need to know the truth." He finally looked at me, but his gaze was distant, like he was staring through me. "Mom, you're retired. Please, just enjoy your life. Don't make problems where there aren't any." The silence after that was unbearable. The clock ticked on the wall, the same rhythm I used to hear when he was a child, doing homework by my side. But now that sound only reminded me of how far apart we'd grown. I gathered the papers slowly, careful not to let my hands shake. I wanted to cry, to yell, to remind him of who I was, but no words came, because the man sitting before me wasn't my son anymore. His face was the same, but his voice carried someone else's thoughts, someone who had learned how to make kindness look like weakness. When I walked out into the night, I finally understood. Love can't survive where pride and deceit have already taken root. Before I could say another word, Andy's voice cut through the air like glass shattering. If it bothers you that much, then keep your money and live on your own. The words hung there, sharp and final, slicing through the space between us. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My son, my only child, had just told me to take my love, my help, and leave. The room went completely still. The television kept flickering in the background, some cheerful sitcom laugh track playing over the silence. Anna stood a few feet away, one hand pressed delicately to her cheek, pretending to hold back tears. But her eyes betrayed her. There was triumph there, a small, satisfied glimmer that told me she had won. I looked at Andy. His jaw was tight, his arms crossed like a wall. I searched his face for something familiar, something soft, but there was nothing left of the boy who once used to run into my arms after school. What stared back at me was a man hardened by pride and poisoned by someone else's influence. I nodded slowly. My throat burned, but my voice stayed calm. I understand, I said quietly. Thank you for being honest. Those words were all I could manage. They were small, fragile, but they held everything: my pain, my surrender, and my final act of dignity. Andy looked away, already done with the conversation. Anna turned her head slightly, hiding a smile that wasn't meant for me to see. I picked up my coat from the chair, slipped it on carefully, and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the air itself was pressing down on me. When I reached for the doorknob, I hesitated for just a second, hoping, foolishly, that Andy might call after me. He didn't. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the quiet like a coffin. Outside, the night was cold and unforgiving. The wind swept through my silver hair, stinging my eyes, but I didn't wipe away the tears. Somewhere between the door and the dark street beyond, I realized that a part of my heart had frozen. Not from anger, but from the slow, unbearable truth. Sometimes love, when unreturned, becomes its own kind of grief. That dinner had been my idea. I wanted it to be a simple, happy night, a way to celebrate Andy's new job opportunity and to remind him that his mother was still proud of him. One of my old colleagues had told me that Andy's former company was hiring again, and when I passed his name along, I felt a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in years. I called Laurel Oaks, a restaurant filled with old memories of our family, and reserved a table for everyone: Andy, Anna, the children, and a few close relatives. I even asked for his favorite wine, the same one he used to share a small glass of with his father long ago. I wanted the evening to feel warm, peaceful, like a fresh start after too many silent years. All afternoon, I busied myself in the kitchen, wrapping small gifts for the grandchildren and arranging flowers for the table. I checked the time over and over, imagining Andy's face when he realized how much thought I had put into the evening. It wasn't about the food or the wine. It was about showing him that no matter what had happened, family was still something worth saving. Then, 1 hour before the dinner, my phone buzzed. It was Anna. "Mom, the restaurant said there was a system issue. They canceled our reservation. Let's reschedule for another time, okay?" The message was short, polite, and written with the same sugary tone she always used in front of others. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. The words felt oddly final, like a door closing quietly in my face. I set the phone down on the counter and looked around my house. The neatly wrapped gifts, the carefully chosen dress waiting on the chair. Everything suddenly felt unnecessary, almost foolish. Still, I didn't reply. I simply took a deep breath, straightened the flowers, and whispered to myself, "It's all right." When the message came, I stared at it for a long moment, unsure what to feel. The restaurant had a system issue. They canceled the reservation. We'll celebrate another time. My eyes lingered on the screen, and a small wave of disappointment rose in my chest. Still, I forced a smile. Maybe they really did have a problem. Maybe I was overthinking. I put the phone aside and tried to calm my thoughts. In the quiet house, I brewed a pot of tea, the familiar scent of chamomile filling the air. I put on an old jazz record, one my late husband used to play on Sunday evenings. The soft melody wrapped around me like a memory, gentle but lonely. I told myself, it's fine. As long as Andy is happy, that's enough. I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. The steam from my tea curled upward, catching the reflection of the lamp. My mind drifted to Andy, how proud I'd been when he graduated, how much I'd sacrificed so he could build a good life. I wanted to believe that the warmth we once shared could still be saved. Then my phone buzzed again. I reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting a harmless notification. But as soon as I saw the message, my breath caught. It was a banking alert. Transaction approved. $50,000 at Laurel Oaks restaurant. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The room felt colder, smaller. My tea trembled in my hand, spilling slightly onto the saucer. Laurel Oaks, the restaurant they said had system issues. My mind raced. $50,000? For a dinner? No, this wasn't a dinner. This was betrayal. And not the loud, obvious kind, but the kind that creeps quietly into the spaces where love used to live. Years of working as a doctor had trained me to read the subtlest signs, the pulse, the tremor, the breath that's just slightly off. That instinct returned now, sharper than ever. My heart knew before my mind could speak it. This wasn't a mistake. Something deliberate was happening, and it had my name written all over it. I placed the phone face down on the table and stared at the reflection in my cup. The woman looking back was calm, too calm. But beneath that calm, something began to stir. Not rage, not despair, but a quiet, steady resolve. I drove to Laurel Oaks without thinking. The city lights blurred past my windshield as I gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. My heart pounded, not from anger yet, but from disbelief that refused to die. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe there was another explanation. When I reached the restaurant, I parked in the VIP section, the same place I had requested when making the reservation. The night air was crisp, and my heels echoed softly against the pavement as I walked toward the large glass windows glowing with warm yellow light. From outside, I could see everything: the laughter, the clinking glasses, the sparkle of chandeliers reflecting off polished silverware. There they were, my family, my son, my grandchildren, Anna, everyone I had imagined sitting around the table. They looked radiant, joyful, exactly as I had pictured. For one fleeting second, I almost smiled, until my gaze reached the head of the table. My seat. It wasn't empty. Sitting there was a woman I recognized immediately, Anna's mother. She wore a red satin dress, her hair styled elegantly, diamonds glittering on her neck. She raised her glass with practiced grace and said loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear, "To my daughter, for her generosity and kindness. You've grown into a woman who truly knows how to love and give." Applause followed. Anna beamed. The children laughed. Andy lowered his head, smiling faintly, and said nothing. Not a word about the woman who had arranged that table, chosen that wine, and dreamed of that very moment for weeks. I stood there frozen, watching through the glass like a stranger peering into someone else's life. My breath fogged the window slightly, blurring the image of the family I thought I still belonged to. Every detail pierced deeper: the chair I had chosen, now holding someone else; the wine I'd ordered, poured into Anna's glass; the warmth I had hoped to create, now used to celebrate my erasure. I didn't move closer. I didn't walk in to demand an explanation. Instead, I stepped back slowly, letting the cold night air fill my lungs. My hands trembled, but my mind was sharp, frighteningly calm. Years of holding families together in hospital emergencies had taught me one thing: when the truth hurts, steady your pulse before you act. So I turned away from the window, my heels clicking against the pavement again. Behind me, laughter spilled through the glass, muffled but cruelly clear. And as I walked toward my car, I knew this night would not end here. It would be remembered, not as the night I was excluded, but as the moment I finally saw them for who they truly were. That moment broke something inside me, cleanly, completely. Standing there on the edge of the parking lot, I felt the last trace of my old illusion slip away. The picture of a happy family. The idea that love alone could fix what had been quietly rotting for years. It all dissolved under the harsh glow of that restaurant's golden light. I realized then that it wasn't just my money they had taken. They had taken my place. My role as a mother had been rewritten, replaced by convenience and appearances. I was no longer the woman who raised a son through sleepless nights, who held him through fever and heartbreak. I had become a wallet, a background figure, someone to use and then politely erase. The ache that followed wasn't fiery, it was cold, almost clear. A strange calm spread through me, the kind that only comes after a long cry that never quite begins. There were no more tears left, only understanding, sharp, steady, unflinching. For the first time, I saw everything exactly as it was, not as I wished it to be. I stood there a little longer, watching through the window as they laughed, their faces glowing under the chandeliers. To anyone passing by, they looked perfect, a family full of joy and warmth. But I knew better now. That light wasn't warmth. It was theater. It was the soft glow people use to disguise cruelty. I turned toward my car, my steps measured, my spine straight. I didn't rush. I didn't look back right away. I opened the door, sat inside, and took one last glance through the rearview mirror. In that small rectangle of reflection, I saw the restaurant fading into the distance, the golden lights shrinking until they were nothing more than a blur. My own face appeared beside them. Tired, yes, but calm. The calm of someone who had finally woken up. As I started the engine, I whispered to myself, "It's all right, Karen, you've seen enough." The words didn't sound bitter, they sounded certain. I drove away quietly, the road stretching ahead in silence. Behind me, the illusion of family grew smaller and smaller, until all that remained was truth, and the quiet strength of a woman who had finally stopped mistaking love for loyalty. When I got home, the night was still and cold, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I hung up my coat, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. The familiar blue glow of the screen lit up the room. My hands no longer trembled. They moved with purpose. I logged into my bank account, scrolled through the transactions, and there it was again. Laurel Oaks Restaurant, $50,000. Without hesitation, I clicked Freeze Card. A small confirmation popped up. Your card has been locked. For the first time that evening, I felt a quiet sense of control return. No shouting, no tears, just clarity. I took screenshots of everything: the bank alert, the transaction details, and the message from Anna claiming the dinner was canceled. Then I opened a blank email, typed the subject line slowly and deliberately. Family dinner, the real story. In the body of the email, I wrote, "I just want everyone to see what happens when kindness is taken for granted. This is how they show respect to the person who paid for their celebration." Below, I attached 3 files: the $50,000 transaction statement, the text message from Anna canceling the dinner, the timestamp showing the charge made exactly during their meal. I reviewed it twice, making sure every word was calm, factual, impossible to twist. No accusations, no anger, just truth printed in digital ink. When I finally clicked send, the small whoosh sound felt strangely final, like the closing of a heavy door. I leaned back in my chair and rested a hand over my chest. My heartbeat was steady, strong. I wasn't sad anymore. The pain had drained away, leaving only light, cold but pure. I looked out the window. The streetlights shimmered on the empty road, and for the first time in months, I breathed without heaviness. The truth was out there now, free to speak for itself. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. But tonight, my evidence would speak louder than any confrontation ever could. The next morning, the sun rose pale and cold over the quiet neighborhood. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the urge to. Instead, I moved through the house with a strange steadiness, the kind that comes after a long, hard storm. I brewed a cup of coffee, its bitter scent grounding me in the present, and carried it to my desk. My laptop screen glowed softly as I logged back into my bank account. The $50,000 charge still sat there like a wound that hadn't yet closed. But this time, I wasn't looking at it with pain. I was looking at it like evidence. Every number, every timestamp, every detail suddenly had meaning. The woman who had been humiliated last night was gone. What remained was someone calm, focused, and very much alive. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the fraud department. The automated voice greeted me politely, but when a live agent came on, my voice was already steady and professional, the same tone I used to have when handling medical emergencies years ago. "Good morning," I said. "This is Dr. Karen Wilson. I need to report unauthorized use of my credit card, an in-person transaction at Laurel Oaks Restaurant, amounting to $50,000. The agent's tone shifted immediately. "Understood, ma'am. Can you confirm the time of the charge?" "Between 7 and 9 p.m. last night," I replied, eyes fixed on the statement. "I was not present. The transaction was made without my consent. As we spoke, I provided details, the card number, the confirmation code, even the digital receipts that matched the restaurant's records." Years of hospital paperwork had trained me well. I was precise, organized, efficient. The agent assured me an investigation would be opened and that the charge would be temporarily frozen pending review. When I ended the call, I sat back in my chair and took a long sip of coffee. The taste was sharp, almost metallic, but it kept me awake, aware. I felt no satisfaction yet, only control returning inch by inch. Outside, the world went on as usual. Cars passing, birds calling. But inside my home, a new order was taking shape. The night of betrayal had ended, and the morning of reckoning had begun. That afternoon, I drove downtown to meet John Miller, my financial attorney for more than 20 years. He had been with me through every major milestone: my retirement, my life insurance, even the setup of Andy's education fund decades ago. If there was one person who understood both my finances and my heart, it was him. When I entered his office, John stood up from behind his desk, his silver hair gleaming under the soft light. "Karen," he greeted gently, "it's been a while." I nodded, took a seat, and handed him a neatly organized folder of documents: statements, authorizations, and copies of every joint account Andy had access to. "I need to make changes," I said, my tone calm but firm. "Effective immediately, I want to revoke all shared financial rights Andy has, cancel the joint credit card, terminate every supplementary account under Anna's name, and freeze all loan guarantees, including the car note and his secondary credit line." John listened without interruption, his eyes steady but understanding. He flipped through the papers, scanning each form carefully. "You've already prepared everything," he remarked softly. "I had all night to think," I replied. "And I've realized that what I called trust was just a kind of denial. It's time to protect what's mine, not out of anger, but out of clarity." John leaned back in his chair and sighed, a mixture of sadness and respect in his gaze. "You've always been patient, Karen. Maybe too patient. But this is the right step. From now on, every dollar you've earned will be protected by law, not by loyalty." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. There was no satisfaction, only a deep, steady resolve. I signed the forms he slid across the desk one by one, my pen moving without hesitation. The final signature felt like closing a door, quietly but permanently. When it was done, John stood and shook my hand. "You've done the hardest part," he said. "Now you can breathe again." I smiled faintly. "Not yet," I answered, "but soon." As I stepped out of his office, the afternoon light flooded the hallway, warm and golden. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace, not the fragile kind that depends on others, but the solid kind that comes from reclaiming control. The next step required precision, not anger. I spent the morning at my desk, printing every piece of evidence: emails, screenshots, bank statements, and the text message from Anna canceling the dinner. Each page bore a date and timestamp, every detail neat and undeniable. The soft hum of the printer filled the room like a steady drumbeat, the rhythm of quiet justice. When the last page slid out, I gathered them into a folder and sealed it carefully. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity, about truth having a chance to breathe after being buried for too long. I drove to visit my Aunt Margaret, the one person who had stood by me through every family storm. She was known and respected in our community, warm, level-headed, and trusted by everyone from the church to the neighborhood council. When I handed her the folder, she looked up at me with worried eyes. "What is this, Karen?" I smiled faintly. "Just the truth. I need people to see it for themselves." She opened the folder, scanned a few pages, and her expression hardened. "They'll regret ever calling you an intruder in your own family," she murmured. By afternoon, the ripple had begun. Margaret shared the documents with a few family members, who forwarded them to others. Within hours, the truth spread through email chains, group messages, and social networks. The photos of my bank statement, Anna's text, and the restaurant charge traveled faster than I ever imagined. In the church group chat, one woman wrote, "So she was paying for the dinner they excluded her from?" Another responded, "How cruel, that poor woman." By evening, the tone had completely shifted. The same people who once pitied Andy and Anna now spoke of betrayal and greed. The story had turned, swiftly, unmistakably. I didn't post anything myself. I didn't need to. The truth was doing what truth does best, standing on its own. My reputation, once stained by their lies, was quietly restoring itself, one message at a time. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood. Somewhere my name was being spoken again, not as a burden, but as a woman wronged and finally vindicated. And for the first time in a long time, I let the calm wash over me, knowing that justice sometimes begins not in a courtroom, but in a conversation. 2 days later, the email from the bank arrived. The message was short, formal, and powerful. After signature verification, the transaction of $50,000 made at Laurel Oaks restaurant has been confirmed as inconsistent with the authorized cardholder's handwriting. This charge is classified as fraudulent. I read the words twice, the corners of my lips tightening into something between relief and quiet resolve. It was no longer a suspicion, it was proof, and this time the law was on my side. I followed the instructions carefully. The bank's fraud department directed me to file an official report under the financial elder abuse provision with the local police, citing the Elder Justice Act, legislation designed to protect seniors from exploitation by family members or caretakers. I printed every document, attached the bank's statement, my photo evidence, and Anna's text messages. When I arrived at the police station, the officer on duty, a middle-aged woman with kind but firm eyes, listened intently as I recounted everything. She nodded as I spoke. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Wilson. We've seen too many cases like this. It's time people learned that stealing from one's own parent is still a crime." They opened a preliminary investigation file, took my formal statement, and asked for all supporting documents. I handed them over, organized, labeled, undeniable. My years as a doctor had made me meticulous, and now that precision was my greatest weapon. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about punishment. I didn't want them in jail. That would be too easy. What I wanted was exposure, the kind that burns away the lies they had wrapped themselves in. I wanted the truth to find its way into daylight, to strip them of the respectability they used to disguise their greed. When I left the station, the evening sky was heavy with gray clouds. The air smelled like rain, sharp and cleansing. I walked slowly to my car, each step steady, deliberate. In the reflection of the glass window, I saw a woman I almost didn't recognize, calm, sharp, unbreakable. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. But now, every signature, every timestamp, every photograph had become part of a weapon built not from anger, but from clarity. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed the world to see them clearly. And that, I knew, would be punishment enough. Once every document was signed, filed, and sealed, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The legal papers were done, the accounts secured, and the investigation set in motion. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest felt lighter. The chaos that once surrounded me had turned into order, an order of my own making. That afternoon, I sat at my computer and booked a one-way ticket to Bali. The flight would leave in 3 days. A warm, faraway place, somewhere with sun, silence, and salt in the air. Not an escape, but a pause. A space to let the noise of betrayal fade into distance. Later, as I packed, I moved slowly and deliberately. Only the essentials went into the suitcase. A few linen dresses, my journal, and the small silver locket with my husband's photo inside. I paused before closing the lid, then reached for the brown leather diary on my nightstand. Its pages carried my handwriting through decades of memories: births, graduations, heartbreaks, recoveries. On a fresh page, I wrote one sentence: "Sometimes silence is the most expensive slap." I closed the journal, a quiet smile touching my lips. It wasn't bitterness I felt anymore. It was balance, the kind that comes from reclaiming what was stolen: dignity, peace, and the right to decide how my story continues. As I looked around my home, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, soft and golden. I realized that I was no longer the humiliated mother begging to belong. I was myself again, an independent woman, calm, self-assured, and armed not with anger, but with truth. Over the next few days, whispers began to spread through the community. The story of the $50,000 dinner and the mother who was left out of the table made its rounds across town. People shared screenshots, emails, and sympathy. But I stayed silent. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. My silence was enough. Anna's name became the talk of the neighborhood, spoken with pity, disgust, and disbelief. Even the church ladies who once praised her politeness now turned their faces away. And Andy? He stayed quiet too, though not out of pride this time, but shame. By the time I zipped my suitcase and placed my passport inside, the world had already redrawn its lines. Justice had arrived, not with noise or punishment, but with the quiet, elegant symmetry of truth finding its way home. I locked the door behind me, took one last look at the garden outside, and smiled again. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from pain. I was walking toward freedom. By the next morning, the storm had arrived. Every corner of Cleveland's small community buzzed with the same story. The emails, the screenshots, the bank statements. They spread through the church group, the women's club, the neighborhood Facebook page. What began as whispers had become a wildfire of truth. At the local cafe, I overheard fragments of it while waiting for my coffee. "Did you see that post?" one woman murmured. The daughter-in-law used her mother-in-law's card for a $50,000 dinner. Then she told everyone the party was canceled. The other gasped. "That's disgusting. Who does that to family?" By evening, the story had reached its full blaze. At the next family dinner hosted by my aunt, the room hummed with gossip and shock. Voices overlapped, sentences collided. She stole from her own mother-in-law? Used her retirement card, no less. And lied about the reservation being canceled? My God. Anna sat stiffly at the end of the table, her face pale but her posture defiant. Andy looked smaller than I had ever seen him, his fork idle, his eyes avoiding every direction. The relatives who once sided with them now looked at me differently, not with pity, but with respect. The tide had turned. On Facebook, posts multiplied by the hour. Someone shared the screenshot of the bank transaction with the caption, "The $50,000 dinner and the mother left outside the door." Hundreds of comments poured in, most expressing outrage, some disbelief, and a few quiet apologies for ever doubting me. Even the local newspaper's gossip column caught wind of the story, calling it a cautionary tale of greed and family betrayal. And as if fate wanted to finish the picture, the owner of Laurel Oaks was interviewed by a local radio host. His calm, professional voice said it all. Yes, the dinner took place as scheduled. The bill was signed by Mrs. Anna Wilson. The credit card used was issued to Dr. Karen Wilson. There was no denial left to cling to. The mask that had protected Anna's image, the sweet, devoted wife, the hard-working woman, shattered in front of everyone. Her friends stopped calling, her colleagues whispered behind her back. And though I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my home, I felt no triumph, just the cool stillness of justice settling into place. Truth, I realized, doesn't shout. It simply stands, and everything false falls away on its own dot. By Monday morning, Anna's world had begun to crumble piece by piece. At her office, the air was heavy, the kind of silence that follows scandal. Colleagues who once praised her charm now avoided her gaze. When she walked through the hallway, conversations stopped mid-sentence, replaced by whispers and sidelong glances. She used to say her mother-in-law was living off her, one co-worker muttered quietly near the break room. Turns out she's the one stealing from her. Another replied, shaking his head, I wouldn't trust her with a company credit card, that's for sure. The gossip spread fast, faster than she could pretend not to hear it. A longtime client called the office and requested to work with someone else. The receptionist, embarrassed, had no choice but to forward the message directly to Anna's inbox. The email was brief. We prefer not to engage with individuals who deceive their own family. Please assign another representative. Anna sat frozen at her desk, staring at the words. Her face, once composed and polished, now looked drained, pale, almost hollow. She had spent years building a professional image, intelligent, trustworthy, ambitious, and it had vanished in a matter of days. The final blow came that evening. Her phone rang, flashing a familiar number, her mother's. The woman who had once stood proudly beside her at that dinner, who had toasted her with champagne and called her a generous soul, now sounded broken and furious. I saw everything, Anna, her mother said, her voice trembling. The photos, the interviews, the comments online. Do you realize what you've done? You've shamed this entire family. I don't even know who you are anymore. Anna tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. All she managed was a weak, Mom, it's not what it looks like. Don't lie to me again, her mother snapped before hanging up. The line went dead, leaving Anna staring at her reflection in the dark phone screen, a reflection she could hardly recognize. Within days, the company announced her temporary suspension, pending internal review. The phrase sounded polite on paper, but everyone knew it meant her career was over. Neighbors avoided her at the grocery store. Parents at her children's school stopped making small talk. Even her friends from yoga group went silent in the chat. The woman who had once thrived on social validation now found herself erased, not by law, but by the quiet, merciless judgment of the community. By the end of the week, her reputation, that carefully polished image of success and virtue, had crumbled completely. Slipping through her fingers like sand dot for Andy, the fall came faster than he could comprehend. Within a week, everything he had built, or thought he had built, collapsed around him. The same friends who once admired his confidence now avoided his calls. At the gym, old buddies turned away mid-conversation. One even muttered under his breath, "How can you respect a man who lets his wife steal from his own mother?" The words hit harder than any punch. The humiliation deepened when an email arrived from the financial firm he had been hoping to join. Just a week earlier, he'd been shortlisted for a management position in their accounting department, a fresh start after months of unemployment. But the subject line now read, Application withdrawal, personal integrity concerns. The message was brief and cold. We regret to inform you that we are rescinding our offer due to recent developments that may affect professional credibility. Andy stared at the screen for a long time, the words burning into him. When he logged into his bank account, the final blow landed. The joint funds he shared with his mother were frozen, the credit lines closed, the car loan under review. His access was gone, every transaction declined, every card rejected. He called customer service, his voice trembling. There must be a mistake. But the representative's answer was firm. Sir, the account is restricted pending legal verification from Dr. Karen Wilson. He hung up, realizing the cruel irony. For the first time in his life, he was financially dependent on Anna, who no longer had a job. Their savings were dwindling, and bills kept arriving like clockwork. The house, once filled with shallow luxury and carefully staged harmony, turned into a battlefield. They argued constantly about money, about blame, about pride. "This is your fault," Andy shouted one night, his voice cracking. "You and your lies destroyed everything." Anna fired back, her face twisted with rage. "My fault? You were too weak to stand up for yourself. You let your mother control us. Now you're paying for it." Plates shattered, doors slammed. The neighbors pretended not to hear, but everyone did. The couple who once projected success now tore each other apart behind thin walls. When the noise finally faded, Andy sat alone in the dark living room, head in his hands. The phone was silent. The world, once filled with noise and approval, had gone quiet. His friends were gone. His job was gone. His wife was a stranger. In that silence, he finally understood what his mother's calm had really meant. Not weakness, but power. She hadn't raised her voice, yet she had reclaimed everything. And he, who once thought he was in control, was now the one left with nothing. The call came late in the evening, when the world outside was quiet and the golden light of the setting sun still lingered through the curtains. My phone buzzed once, twice, and for a moment I hesitated. I already knew who it was. When I finally answered, Andy's voice trembled through the line. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, his breath uneven. "I didn't know things would turn out like this." There was a long pause before I replied. I could hear him struggling to breathe, the same boy who used to hide behind me when he broke a window playing baseball. But that boy was gone. What remained was a man finally facing the ruins of his choices. "Andy," I said softly, my tone calm even, "you once told me not to interfere in your life, so now I'm doing just that. I'm staying out." The silence on the other end was heavy. I could almost feel it, the sound of guilt pressing against his chest. Then, faintly, I heard him crying. Not the loud sobs of anger, but the quiet kind that comes when you realize it's too late. "Mom, please, I never meant—" I didn't interrupt him. I didn't say it was all right. I didn't tell him I forgave him, because forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't something that could erase the truth. I simply listened. The way doctors do when they know there's nothing more they can do for a patient except let them speak. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, carrying the faint hum of the city. I sat still, the phone pressed lightly to my ear, saying nothing. Sometimes silence hurts more than any word. After a while, his crying faded into slow, broken breaths. Neither of us said goodbye. We didn't need to. The distance between us had already spoken. When the call ended, I placed the phone on the table and stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't ache. It simply settled, quiet and steady. I knew this conversation would mark the end of something, not just between mother and son, but between who we once were and who we had become. That night I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, some lessons must be learned through loss. And for Andy, I knew this would be the one lesson that would never leave him. Justice, when it came, arrived quietly but decisively. A week after my official report, the bank concluded its internal review. The email was brief, professional, and impossible to refute. Following handwriting verification and transaction review, the $50,000 charge at Laurel Oaks restaurant has been determined to be an intentional act of fraud. The signature on record does not match the authorized cardholder, Dr. Karen Wilson. Those words marked the beginning of something larger. Not revenge, but accountability. The case file, complete with complaint forms, transaction data, and digital evidence, was forwarded to the Financial Crimes Division of the Cleveland Police Department. From that moment, it was no longer a family matter. It was a criminal investigation. A few days later, official letters were delivered to Andy and Anna's home. They were formal, stamped, and clear. Notice to appear, financial fraud investigation. Both names appeared side by side. The letter requested their presence at the station for questioning as directly involved parties in a case concerning unauthorized financial use. When Anna read the notice, her hands shook so hard she nearly tore the envelope. "This can't be happening," she whispered, pacing the living room. Her face, once perfectly composed, turned ghostly pale. Andy took the paper from her trembling hands, his eyes scanning the words again and again, as if repetition could change their meaning. "They're not going to charge us," he muttered, half to himself. "This is just a formality." But even as he spoke, the fear in his voice betrayed him. The very institutions he once believed distant, the bank, the police, the law, were now staring directly into his private life. That evening, when the news spread among neighbors, whispers began to echo across their quiet street. People who once admired their home now passed by with subtle glances. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. The story that had started as gossip was now a matter of law. Anna spent the night pacing the hallway, her thoughts unraveling. "It's your mother's fault," she hissed. "If she hadn't gone to the police—" Andy interrupted, his voice hollow. "If you hadn't used her card, we wouldn't be here." The argument died there, replaced by silence heavy enough to crush the air. For the first time, they both understood. The law was no longer something they could manipulate or hide from. The walls of pretense had fallen, and what remained was the truth. Written plainly in black and white on official paper, within days, Anna's world spun completely out of control. The bank initiated a chargeback process for the $50,000, citing confirmed fraud, and froze all of her accounts pending the ongoing investigation. Every card linked to her name was suspended. Her debit, her credit, even the one she once used for her business expenses. Overnight, she went from shopping freely to having her payments declined at every checkout. Then the bills began to arrive like waves, crashing one after another. Credit card debt, personal loans, spa memberships, fine dining receipts, luxury handbags and boutique purchases, all of it accumulated with brutal precision. The numbers grew faster than she could process them. Collection calls came day and night, each one colder than the last. "Mrs. Wilson, your balance is overdue. Final notice before legal action." The polite tone of the bank's customer service had vanished. When her company learned about the incident, the Human Resources Department acted swiftly. A formal letter appeared in her inbox, bearing the subject line, "Termination of employment, ethical misconduct." The text was sterile, detached. "Due to recent events that have negatively impacted the organization's reputation, your employment is hereby terminated, effective immediately." For years, she had been their model employee, efficient, ambitious, immaculately dressed. Now she was a cautionary tale whispered in office corridors. "Can you believe she stole from her own mother-in-law?" one coworker muttered. "I used to admire her. Guess appearances really do lie." Anna stopped going out. The curtains in her house stayed drawn, as if hiding could make the world forget. Her phone buzzed endlessly with unread messages, reporters, former colleagues, even strangers asking for comments. She turned it off, unable to bear the noise of her own reputation collapsing. Her mother, once her proudest supporter, called only once. The conversation was short and final. "Don't come home, Anna. I can't have the neighbors asking questions. You've brought shame to this family." The line went dead before Anna could respond. By the end of the week, she was completely alone. Her bank accounts frozen, her job gone, her debts growing. The same neighbors who used to greet her with smiles now whispered when she passed. Some pitied her, others smirked with quiet satisfaction. The woman who once seemed untouchable, polished, successful, envied, had become the living proof of how greed disguises itself as ambition. And as she sat in her darkened living room, surrounded by the fragments of her former life, Anna finally understood what real poverty was. Not the lack of money, but the loss of dignity. His downfall didn't come with noise or headlines. It came quietly, the way twilight slips in when no one is paying attention. I watched it happen from afar, not with anger, but with the weary understanding that every choice has its price. Andy had lost everything: the house, the job, and most of all, the trust of the only person who had ever loved him without condition. Me. He used to say I didn't understand the world he lived in, that I was old-fashioned, that my way of thinking belonged to another time. But now, as he stood in a greasy garage wearing oil-stained shirts and fixing strangers' cars for a living. I knew he finally understood what I had tried to teach him all along, that dignity isn't something you buy, it's something you live. He had moved into a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of Cleveland, a place that smelled of dust and regret. The bank had repossessed his house, the furniture was gone, and his name, once clean, was now marked by shame. I didn't go there, but I could imagine it clearly. The bare walls, the empty fridge, the silence. Sometimes at night, I would sit by my window and wonder if he was reading the old emails I'd sent him years ago. "Don't skip breakfast, Andy. I'm proud of you no matter what. Call me when you have time." I used to think those words went unnoticed. Now I know he read them again and again. I could feel it, that quiet connection between a mother and her child that not even betrayal can break. He never wrote back, and I never asked him to. Some wounds don't need words, they just need time. Friends told me I should forgive him, that I should reach out. But I think forgiveness isn't always about reunion. Sometimes it's about letting the silence teach the lesson words never could. Anna had left him, of course, his friends too. The world that once revolved around him had gone still, and there, in that stillness, he finally met the truth. Not the one I tried to tell him, but the one he had to live through to understand. He learned that punishment doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from the echo of your own actions, from waking up alone and realizing that the person who once called you son no longer needs to speak for you to understand. Dot. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and coral. I sat alone on the quiet shore of Bali, the sea breeze lifting strands of my silver hair. On my lap rested the small, leather-bound journal I had carried for years, my silent companion through every storm, every heartbreak, every quiet victory. I opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, my hand steady despite the years. "People only realize a mother's worth when they can no longer call her mom." I looked at that sentence for a long time. It didn't hurt anymore. There was no bitterness left in me, only clarity. The kind that comes when a storm has passed, and you can finally breathe again. My phone buzzed beside me. For a moment I hesitated to look, but then I saw the name on the screen. Andy. My heart tightened, then softened. The message was short. "Mom, I got a job." I smiled faintly. For a few seconds I simply stared at it, letting the words settle. Then I typed back. "Good. Take care of yourself. And never use anyone else's card again." I pressed send and placed the phone next to my cup of tea. The waves kept rolling in, calm and rhythmic, erasing footprints one by one. I watched them for a while and thought, maybe that's what time does for us mothers. It washes away the pain but leaves behind the lessons. Leaning back, I closed my eyes. I felt no anger, no sadness, not even triumph. Just peace, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for apologies and start choosing your own happiness. From somewhere down the beach, I heard a child's laughter carried by the wind. It made me smile. Love, I realized, never really dies. It just changes shape, gentler, wiser, more careful. I took the last sip of my tea and whispered to the wind, "Justice doesn't always come from the courts. Sometimes it comes from time, and the truth that never dies." The waves seemed to answer me, clapping softly against the shore. My dear listener, if you've ever been betrayed or taken advantage of by your own children or relatives, tell your story. Wisdom never grows old, and karma always finds its way home.